There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Ryder.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. And with me today is retired NYPD detective and straight out of Brooklyn, Phil Grimaldi. How you doing today, Phil?
I'm doing pretty good, Billy, and I'm looking to get into this with Mike. This is going to be a good show.
You know, Phil, I didn't think we could outdo yesterday's show because even in my most humble opinion, it was pretty damn good. But we have an unbelievable guest with us tonight, and we figured we have to go towards the prosecutorial side because neither you or I are an attorney. But who we have with us is Michael Vecchione, a former chief of the Brooklyn Homicide Squad. He was a district attorney and the chief of that bureau when Brooklyn was out of control with murders. Mike Vecchione, welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. And it's always a pleasure to speak to both of you guys.
Mike, before we get going, I just want to also brag a little bit about you. Mike's got, I'm going to just show you 3 of the books he's written. He's got another one coming out, Friends of the Family, which of course is about the mafia cops, Stephen Caracappa and Louis Ippolito. And this is one of his most recent books, Homicide is My Business, Luigi the Zip. And then he's got a book called Crooked Brooklyn. I'm not going to spend the whole show on this, but just know not only was a great prosecutor, but he's becoming, or he is, a great author. Mike, you know, we've been covering this case. You're very welcome. We've been covering this case since November 13th when this horrific crime happened in Moscow, Idaho. The slaughter of 4 beautiful kids, 2 of them were 20 and two of them were 21 years old. Inexplicable, unexplainable, every adjective you could possibly use. But we were all surprised, actually, when an arrest was made in this. Not just surprised, but happy as all hell that this occurred. And every bit of investigative technology, evidence, gumshoe work, detective work, FBI work was used to bring this guy into custody. And I'll mention for all the people, all you civil libertarians out there, yes, he's innocent to proven guilty. But we're from the guilty part of the criminal justice system. We're looking to bring a case against someone and prove them guilty. We're not looking for the Innocence Project here. There's many of you who are, and I appreciate you. That's why I said he's innocent to proven guilty. And we have Michael Vecchione here to tell us about what he's going to be looking at in regards to this prosecution. And Mike, off the air, you said to me, hey, Bill, this case is not a slam dunk. You want to talk a little bit about what you meant by that, Mike?
Yeah, I did say that to you, Bill. And the reason I say that now is because based on what we know, and we don't know everything, there's no question about it. I believe that there could be an issue with the DNA, which is the central part of the case, based on what I've read and what I've listened to you guys and have heard. And the reason I say a problem or potential problem is we don't know how and where the DNA was collected from in that particular house. The collection of the substance from which they extracted DNA, which they say is connected to this defendant, is going to be a major issue in the case. We do know that blood and other secretions were all over the bedrooms and apparently all over the house. I saw one photograph of blood streaming down the foundation of the house. So the question becomes how well the people who collected all of these substances did it and how they preserved it. And was there any contamination, outside contamination? So all of those things are questioned. So I say that until those are all expanded upon or expounded upon, and we know how that was done, I think that there could be a problem. And of course, the other issue is the missing murder weapon. We don't have it. and who knows if they'll ever get it. Now, I've tried a lot of cases, and I've tried a lot of cases without a murder weapon recovered. But in this particular case, it seems to me that the murder weapon, the examination of the murder weapon, if it's recovered, will make this a slam dunk. Because if they prove it is the knife that was used to kill these young people, then I don't care what happens after that. They're going to, and they can tie it to him, which I'm sure they would be able to. That's going to make this that will take it to the point of a slam dunk case. And they haven't done that yet. So, those are the two issues that I think are still out there that need to be resolved in a way that makes this something that a jury looks at and says, man, I don't care what the other people, I can't vote anything other than this guy being guilty. So,
all right, Mike, we're going to get back to you with more of the legal issues on this case. And after Phil gives his opinion on some of the things you just said, I'm going to play a clip by CNN, which sort of synopsizes this case as to where we are right now. Phil?
Well, I was just getting some flashbacks from, talking with a prosecutor on a murder case, because Mike's spoken like a true prosecutor. You want the smoking gun. I get it. I think that perhaps maybe the murder weapon may or may not be recovered. But if we could have someone come forward that saw him with that knife, maybe they can track back a purchase of that specific knife. I think we're going to be able to get the medical examiners to testify in court about the wounds, the depth of the, giving the circumference of the blade and the depth of the injuries. And if we can tie some type of, even if the weapon's not recovered, if we can have someone come into court, say, I saw him with the knife, or if he showed someone the knife, or if he possessed that type of knife, and we can link a purchase through a credit card or something like that, I think that would be probably just, maybe under recovering the knife, but that would be pretty powerful evidence.
I agree with you.
Forward.
I agree with you.
All right, guys, let's go to the CNN report here.
Billings is scheduled to be in court tomorrow in Pennsylvania, where he is expected to not fight efforts to bring him back to Idaho to face 4 murder charges. Today, CNN's Gene Cassara spoke with the public defender assigned to the case in Monroe County, Pennsylvania.
The man who police say killed 4 college students, then weeks later drove cross-country tracked by police, will go back to Idaho to face charges.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger,
Ethan Chapin, Zaina Kernoodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Goncalves were stabbed to death November 13th in this Moscow, Idaho home.
This was a very complex and extensive case.
DNA was recovered at the crime scene. A source with knowledge of the investigation tells CNN the suspect was identified through genetic genealogy, a process where DNA from an investigation is compared to a public database, potentially leading to a family member of a suspect. Kohberger's lawyer says his father flew to Washington State to bring him to Northeast Pennsylvania for the holidays.
His father actually went out there and they drove home together.
They drove his white Hyundai Elantra. A car matching that description was in the immediate area of the killings, police said. CNN confirmed they stopped at a repair shop in Pennsylvania where some work was done on the vehicle.
I believe he arrived somewhere around the 17th of December.
Jason Labar, the chief public defender from Monroe County, Pennsylvania, is representing Kohberger until he is extradited. A law enforcement source says the FBI watched him for 4 days before he was arrested.
The FBI, local police, Idaho state troopers were at their house at approximately 3 a.m. knocking on the door and announcing themselves to enter.
Kohberger graduated in May from DeSales University in Pennsylvania with a master's in criminal justice and was pursuing a doctorate at Washington State University, only about 7 miles away from the University of Idaho. He has to appreciate the seriousness of what is happening right now.
Oh, absolutely. He is very intelligent. In my hour conversation with him, that comes off. I can tell that. And he understands where we are right now.
While in college at DeSales, Kohberger asked ex-cons to participate in a study. This study seeks to understand the story behind your most recent criminal offense, with emphasis on your thoughts and feelings throughout your experience, he wrote on an online message board.
this person that had been, kind of grading my papers was, allegedly this like horrible murderer.
Kohberger was working as a teacher in Washington, and one student claims his demeanor and his strict grading changed after the murders.
He started grading everybody just 100s, and now obviously he seems like he was probably pretty preoccupied.
For victims' families, this arrest is a step toward closure and a chance to see Kohberger in court.
It's a little bit of hope. Things are moving in the right direction. There was a lot of time of not knowing. We're going to definitely look this guy and look him in his eyes. He's going to have to deal with this.
And the extradition proceeding will take place right here in northeastern Pennsylvania tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And after that, the authorities will get him back to Idaho, where we very shortly thereafter will have his initial appearance to face those 4 felony counts of first-degree murder. And the chief public defender here in northeastern Pennsylvania did tell me that he does believe in Idaho, which has the death penalty, that this quite possibly could be a capital case. Jake?
So there's a synopsis on what we have from the prosecutorial end, Mike. Today's a hearing, I believe, around 4 o'clock. That's Pacific time.
Right.
12 will be 12:30, I guess, 1:30, 2:30, or 1:30 Pacific time. That really, we're not going to learn that much from that. He's already waived extradition. They may throw him on a plane this evening and get him back to Idaho.
Correct.
Now, I have 2 questions. One is, because this is such a huge case and he doesn't seem like his family or he is a person of means, will they appoint a legal aid attorney, which is, it seems a case like this is beyond the scope of most legal aid attorneys? Or will a hired gun come forward pro bono to represent him because this is such a huge case and he'll get paid in publicity? What do you think?
Well, I think that I don't think a legal aid attorney will be the will represent him in Idaho. I think that if it's a free attorney appointed by the state, it will be from a group of lawyers who are experienced attorneys who volunteer their time to represent people who are charged with this kind of case, murder cases and strong cases. I, as a defense attorney, one time in my life was on the 18B panel here in New York. That was a panel in which I volunteered my time to represent people charged with crimes like him. Now, if Idaho has something like that, then I believe that that's where the lawyer will come from. And the other way of, and you're correct, Bill, about the other possibility, is that this is a case that is going to get nationwide publicity from the day that he shows up in Idaho until the day that there's a resolution of this case. Now, if somebody, an attorney, desires to have his name out there and is qualified to do this, I could see some hired gun, as you say, stepping forward and saying, "Listen, I'm going to represent this guy because everybody is owed the the right to a vigorous defense, and people are already hanging him. He's owed this, and I'm going to step forward and do this." And he becomes a hero to all the people who believe that that this guy may very well not have done this. So both are possible. I would not be surprised if, as you say, one of these hired guns stepped forward, because I think that it's worthwhile. The publicity is worthwhile to do this on the arm, so to speak.
Mike, by the way, that's another, a hired gun is another canonism, as I call them.
Yes.
Pathology, hired gun,
surreptitiously.
Surreptitiously. I'm putting together a dictionary soon, but and Phil's going to have to do his.
And
the
perpology.
Definition, really know if you're from Brooklyn.
Yeah,
Mike, say that again. What was that?
And perpology. I was going to ask you guys, is that a police off the cuff term? Because that's one of the things I learned in law school. So,
another canonism, as they say, Mike.
No, that's good. That's good. So that's my best.
Mike, I got a question for you regarding, we were talking about the DNA evidence. Now, it's being reported that DNA evidence was collected from the garbage at his home. Do you think that could possibly be some type of a roadblock that they'd have to get through at trial?
Not if Idaho allows, let me take a step back. The Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to essentially garbage. If you abandon something and put it in a garbage can and the police come along and take it out and it becomes crucial evidence, then the fact that there was no warrant to take that is of no consequence because it was an abandoned piece of property and you could take it. The question I have is, how do you know, particularly if this is a genealogy DNA situation, they could be recovering DNA on, let's say, a coffee cup that someone has recovered. Maybe the coffee cup is, was used by his dad or his mom or one of his sisters. I'm not so sure that kind of evidence, unless it's placed in his hand or in his mouth or in some part of his body, is going to be a factor that solidifies the case. They need more than just the garbage,
But Mike, what the fact that he was in the area, he went to the college, which was only a few miles away. The vehicle that was described as being fleeing the scene was his vehicle, we believe, or it's the same type of vehicle. Would those factors come into play that, in other words, now we recover garbage from the house, there is a DNA match. Would that be enough, you think, to make the arrest and then take a court-ordered DNA sample from the perpetrator?
Yeah, but I'm a little confused, Phil. Are you talking about his house in Pennsylvania? Or
yes,
the
house in Pennsylvania. It's alleged that some type of garbage was removed from the house and that there was a DNA match to the crime scene. So I get what you're saying. Maybe it came from his mother, his father, whoever else could have lived in that house. We don't know exactly. But I think with all the other extenuating circumstances that he was, known to follow the girls on social media, he was in the area, their cell phones were connecting at different times in the past. All of these other factors, I think that would be a mitigating circumstance to say that, okay, the DNA came from the house. Let's go arrest him.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track in terms of the evidence can be used. If they find something in garbage and they believe that, and it matches the DNA that they found in the Moscow, Idaho house, of course, that's a very strong piece of evidence. But if it was me and if I was the prosecutor, when they got to Idaho, one of the first things I would do as the prosecutor in charge is to make a motion before the court to swab his mouth and to take his blood to get DNA so that we have a definitive answer at that point, as opposed to presenting a situation where a good defense attorney could raise a reasonable doubt. It's something that was found in Pennsylvania. Well, of course, they're going to argue to the jury the DNA was found on that. He lived with his parents. He lived in that house. He was staying there from the 17th. There are so many factors that can be raised that could mitigate against the quality of evidence coming from Pennsylvania, that to be certain, I would swab his mouth and I would take blood and then take the DNA and hope for a match. Hope. And I'll tell you why I say this. I've had two cases, believe it or not, two murder cases where I thought I had, Bill, a slam dunk. And I wanted to make it a grand slam dunk. And I asked the judge to order DNA taken from the defendant. And guess what? In both situations, I had a problem. In one situation, the DNA from the perp didn't match the DNA left at the crime scene. In another situation, the DNA at the crime scene was not the perp's. There was an unknown DNA in this palm print. And now I had to figure out how I was going to explain that away. Now, luckily, I was able to do it. But the bottom line is, again, to remove any potential problems with the DNA, not the collection, that's a different situation, but with the matching of the DNA, they should take a sample of his DNA when he gets to Idaho. That's,
Mike, 100%. But one of the things we suggested on an earlier show is once they got this genealogical hit on a relative, there's a lot more checks that have to bring him into the picture. Now they have this unidentified, which the DNA from the scene. And if that DNA is from blood evidence or smoking gun, would be DNA underneath the fingernails of one of the victims.
No question.
And he might as well fold up the tent and go home and get his new cell at state prison,
without
But
a
the
doubt.
thing is, they could have had that and then surreptitiously, I'm using another canonism, gotten his DNA and compared it to that unidentified DNA in the crime scene. And if it hits, boom, that's almost as good as a straight up exemplar from it, right straight from him.
You're 100% correct. And I believe that would be stronger if, let's say, during the time they were following him from Idaho to Pennsylvania, let's say they stopped at a diner to have dinner, he and his father. And after they left, the cops or the FBI went in and grabbed his utensils or his glass or his coffee cup. Then we have very, very strong DNA evidence, as opposed to what I said before in terms of the garbage, because we don't know who put that particular item into that garbage or who used it. But you're correct, Bill. They may have done this already. They may have absolutely positive DNA from him identified in some way along the lines that I just described. And if they do, I'm still, if I'm the prosecutor, I would still ask for the swab and for the blood sample. You can't. I've tried too many cases to think that this is no problem. Let's just go ahead and try the case. You've got to close off every avenue, particularly if one of your heavy hitters comes in and represents this guy. Hey, look, just let's go back to the famous DNA case, which was the OJ case. How many people thought that case was a slam dunk case? Right? There were so many people who believed it was because of the witnesses, etc. And the collection of the DNA was what was the problem at the end of the day. That was a problem in the case, and it was a problem that never went away for those prosecutors. I mean, there were other cases, there were other problems with that, but the DNA collection is something which is very, very important. Let me raise one other issue. That place, that house, although they say, it was a house that was on a campus, it was likely to be a place where they had parties, where they had gatherings, where people showed up, fraternity house, maybe like a fraternity house party, guys passing in and out, don't have to stay there in order to leave DNA. This guy may very well have, his defense attorney may say, he was in this house. So of course you're going to find his DNA, which comes back to what you said, Bill. If it's something under the fingernails of one of the victims, then then he could talk about any party he wants. That's not going to be the situation.
Commingled blood, same thing, Mike, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Blood is the same thing. But if it was something else, let's assume, I don't know, there was a cup or a glass, or who knows how well these people, cleaned their house or did their dishes. That very well could be the source of the DNA in the house in Moscow. And then that becomes a bigger problem. A big problem for the prosecution.
Mike, I wanted to also ask, since you're here, we're going to use you. We'll get back to the perpology, which is the study of everything to do with the perp.
Okay.
You sitting down with all the investigators, what are you going to ask them to do at the beginning of this case now for you that builds this case even stronger? What are some of the things you're going to ask them to do?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would do is what I just already said, which is to make sure that they take a sample of this guy's blood or they swab his mouth to get DNA. If that's the foundation of the case, then I need to be able to say for certain that this DNA that I found in that house or that the investigators found in that house belongs to this guy Kohberger. The next thing I would do is I would make sure that every document written by the police, I'll call them DD5s, which is what we call them here in New York, is gone over by the respective agencies, and that there is no conflict between the DD5s written by, let's say, the Idaho police, the state troopers, maybe the 302s from the FBI, because once again, many cases have been lost because of paperwork from law enforcement people, because that, it's 4 o'clock in the morning and you're jotting down notes. And when you go in the next day to now type it out, you may not necessarily remember that this particular abbreviation is of this word as opposed to another word. So being careful about about all of the paperwork in the case, which is going to be gone over with a fine-tooth comb and a microscope by the defense attorney, is important. The other thing is interviews.
You know, Mike, just to interrupt you,
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject something that was funny. I remember I was reading a report from this cop one time, and he used FM. And I said to him, I go, what the hell is FM? He goes, female. I was like, where does that come from? The Webster's standard abbreviation. Where did you get that from?
Bill, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You know,
Female.
I got to tell you this: when I was in rackets, we were involved in an investigation, and I was with a detective, well, one of our detective investigators, and we sat down and interviewed a witness. I told him, do not take a single note. I don't want you taking a note. I have a good memory, and I'll remember what this guy says. And if necessary, we'll go back and interview him, and we'll do it on tape as opposed to taking notes. Because if somebody's sitting there and they're taking notes and they're writing when the guy says something very important and he doesn't have time to get that down, well, I've lost that, you know. And notes, paperwork, I can't tell you how important those things are in terms of a defense attorney, because I used to be one. And the first thing I did was grab the police file and go over it with a fine-tooth comb. So paperwork was the other thing. And then, of course, the witness statements. I'd want every single witness statement in my office, and I'd want to interview the person who took the statement from the individual who was the so-called witness. And then after that, I want them to bring the witness in to me so I can speak to the witness and do it firsthand. So those are the three things off the top of my head that I can think of. And then, of course, there's the forensic evidence. You know, how do I get that together and in a place where I can go over it with someone who is not the person who did the work, but someone who could be an outsider to look to see if there is something wrong with the work that was done, some check and balance on what was done. So in a case like this, you can't, you know, money is not an object or shouldn't be an object, and you really have to spend as much as necessary to make sure that the evidence is strong. So,
And how about what concerns every prosecutor is discovery? And when and where do you turn that over? How soon do you turn that over? Do you hold it back for a while?
Okay, well, in New York, you can no longer do that. In New York, you have to get it within a certain period of time. I haven't been in the DA's office since 2013, so I don't know what the time frame is.
I think it's like 15 days now, Mike, 14 or 15 days.
That is a real problem. Now, I don't know what the law in Idaho is, but here's what I used to do, Bill, and I know that you guys probably think I'm crazy. Even before this 15-day rule, when I had a case, a big case, or any case, I would copy every single piece of paper in the file, every piece of paper. And I would turn the whole thing over to the defense. I would turn everything over. Then, because if I was satisfied that when I gave the order to make an arrest, then I was satisfied that I could win this case based on the evidence. So I was not afraid to turn over everything, and nobody could say that I was holding back, you know, information. So I would say that we don't know the Idaho law, but if the Idaho law is one that is kind of open-ended, then the prosecutor has to make sure that when they turn it over, that they've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they've turned it over with no worries as to what's in there. You know, you can't really go back and correct mistakes made. You can't go back and correct mistakes that are made in DD-5s or in reports from doctors or things of that nature. You just have to live with them, and you got to hope as a prosecutor that there are more of the good things than there are of the bad things, because you could lose a case with something that is really something that you can't correct at that point. So.
Absolutely, Phil.
Inconsistencies on specific reports. I get what you're saying, Mike. It makes sense to go over it, and I think that if there is an inconsistency, perhaps the person's perception or they miss something that the witness said or something like that. If you don't get it as a surprise at trial, you can be prepared for it, and you can discuss it, and you can answer it out when you get to that point in the trial. So that makes a lot of sense. And listen, we have an obligation the prosecution does to turn over everything in discovery. So they're going to get it one way or the other, and they deserve it. And you wouldn't want something to be held back, and then now you're going to have a mistrial, or you're going to have an overturned conviction down the line, and you're going to have to retry and stuff like that. So playing by the rules is always the way to go. And I think you're making a great point to be to review everything and know about it before you get into the trial process, so that way you're prepared for it. Obviously makes a lot of sense.
Without a doubt. And Phil, I'm sure that you've sat in on preps by prosecutors when you were going to trial.
Many times.
One thing that is important is if you do have a problem in a DD5, let's say, that you go over it and anticipate what the defense attorney is going to cross-examine the witness on, so that you can, be able to explain it away, or explain it, not necessarily away, but explain it, why that, it may be just, listen, it was a mistake. I heard someone wrong. And I believe that the last time I was here, I mentioned an example of this. I did a double cop killing. 2 cops were killed. And at the rush of at the beginning of the case, when cops were showing up at the scene, and there were two of their brothers laying there on the ground dead, one of the guys got on the air and called it in as to they were looking for a 5'5", 5'6" Hispanic as the perpetrator. Well, it turns out the defendant was a 6'2" or 6'3" black man. Yes. And what he was doing, the cop was looking down at the perpetrator's buddy, who was a 5'5", 5'6" Hispanic. And because of the stress of the scene, he gave that description as the guy had gotten away when he was looking down at the guy who's dead on the ground. That became a problem from the beginning of the case until the end of the case. And a good defense attorney can exploit that to the point of a not guilty verdict. And so...
Mike, I had a case where I had a triple homicide, and we didn't recover the actual weapon. However, there was a knife that was vouched from inside the apartment where the triple homicide took place, and it was consistent with the stab wound. So we vouched it. So the person that vouched it was a detective, went back to the scene later on after we had already left, and vouched the knife. At a hearing, I testified, the district attorney presented the knife, and I testified under oath that it was vouched by crime scene. At trial, they brought that up. They said, well, didn't you testify that this knife was vouched by the crime scene unit at the time that crime scene was present? And I said, yes. And then they presented the DD5 to me. And I said, well, in my testimony at the hearing, I must have been mistaken. It's usually routine for crime scene to vouch a knife. However, reading this report that you refreshed my memory, a detective did go back later on. Right. And that was their big aha moment. But the fact that I was able to answer it out and say, I was mistaken when I testified at the hearing. I did say under oath that because that's what I believed at the time. But now you've showed me the report that says it was vouched by another detective hours later after we went back to see if there were any other knives that would fit that description of murder weapon. And the jury, no problem, and they went along with it. Everything went good. But the fact that I was able to answer it out, I was mistaken. I didn't, they tried to say, well, you just perjured yourself at the hearing. You committed perjury, blah, blah, blah. Wasn't the case. It was a mistake. I answered it out, and everything went forward.
And believe me, Phil, juries appreciate that. I've talked to jurors after cases, and things are said, and they'll say to me, the detective, we appreciate the detective admitting that there was, some sort of a mistake, as opposed to trying to explain away, the lie.
We're not perfect, and we say that all the time on the show. We make mistakes sometimes, and I made one on that case, and it wasn't like I was intentionally lying. It was just a mistake. Thank God it was answered out.
I want to play a little bit of this, and what this is going to lead up to is, Mike, and then we'll discuss this, is the fact that juries and people, they want to hear motive, even though motive is not a necessary element to prove the crime. Juries and the public, they love to hear it.
Correct.
Confirmed. There were some incidents at a brewery in Pennsylvania, aggressive flirting with a couple of female bartenders that made them extremely uncomfortable enough that this information was in the system and was flagged at the door. So is this kind of behavior or track record with women significant as law enforcement builds a case and a profile?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, this is something that needs to be explored thoroughly. And let me give you one more. For me, this case has really struck me recently when we found out about what this guy's age is, he's 28, it's really hard for me to fathom that he's just getting started perpetrating this kind of behavior at 28 years of age. You know, I'm not inside the room with the police officers making the decisions about this, but they need to take a real long, hard look at his history in Pennsylvania. They need to go to various properties he's lived at. They need to take a look at this guy very, very carefully and see if there's anything that can tie him back to any other instances. You don't get this sudden escalation in violence like this, in my opinion, at least, it seems to be so well thought out.
Wow, that's chilling insight. So we know one of the victims was brutally attacked with a knife more than the others. So how do investigators build a case for a motive in this quadruple murder?
Well, you know, that's the thing about it. I'm glad you brought up the idea of motive, because, you know, in court, you don't have to prove motive. But what you do have to prove is that he was the perpetrator of the crime. And of course, being a forensic scientist, I'm going to rely upon that. I want to know the numbers. I want to know, you know, his connectivity vis-a-vis any kind of biological tiebacks that there are there, and probably his methodologies that he employed while he was perpetrating these crimes. Again, this goes back to any kind of linear connection he might have in his recent past or distant past and all of these various locations. And those are going to be specific tiebacks that are be very foundational. Again, if it's not necessary in court, it's great to have. We see it as a device in entertainment, but it's not necessarily something that you have to have in court. Yeah, and again, Kelly, has not been studying forensic science. There was an article that came out earlier today where it was conflating, I think, some of his studies with the study of forensic science. Nothing could be further from the truth. He's a studier of behavior. That's what he was going into, criminal behavior. All right. Forensic science and those things are not the same thing. So he's not, still say, for instance, as somebody that would have worked in the forensic sciences. He might have an understanding, at least from a spectator point of view. I'm trying to know everything. Trust in this. He is going to be in his knowledge of forensic science. He may have made attempts by virtue of what he's seen or witnessed or heard in the classroom to mask some behaviors. He's some trace behind. That's how they've gotten their hands on him at this point, and that's how this tale is going to be told. Well, I think that we're products of the environment, you know, in which we are introduced into. He has an interest, obviously, in the study of criminal behavior, you know, and the fact that he went to find scholars, Catherine Ramsland, to sit there and be in her class is not necessarily a surprise. Again, you can't, not you, but just in general, you can't conflate, you know, his worldview with those of us that study behavior and criminal behavior and also forensic sciences. He just sought out the information just like any other accused might that has been accused of some kind of and sit around and try to what you can about how things. If you're looking to defeat a lock in a residence or something like that, wouldn't it be cool if you could learn it from a locksmith or see what they do? It's essentially the same thing, but you know, in very broad terms, he's scholarly environment. He's not in an applied environment, learning from point A to point B to Z about how the process really works. It's a very broad-banded kind of environment that he's in.
This is, to me, is fascinating. We as cops, we think a little bit different. He referred to the woman, Catherine Ramsland, who studied serial killers, went to prisons and interviewed them for, I think, for like 5 years. She was interviewed on a TV station yesterday. When the interviewer mentioned evil, she mixed evil into, oh no, it's not evil. That's religiously inspired, which immediately turned me off because I've seen evil. And I think Phil has too. I don't want to speak for you, Mike, but we've seen evil.
I have as well.
And Right. So when she almost denies that evil exists, it's something with the frontal lobe or the rear passage. Please stop. Because you interviewed all these evil people, which what I consider, let's not give them an out by saying there's something wrong with their brain. Well, that may be, but not in every instance. And there is evil out there.
There's no question. And a lot of these things, you have to say it could be this, it could be that. There's no definitive answer at this point. Maybe at some point, in the years to come, we'll get a definitive answer as to what the reason for this guy acting the way he did. But right now, nobody can do that. The idea that he's studying and was studying the behavior of these past serial killers, or in his studies was looking at behavior, can be used by the defense attorney, can be turned around. If the prosecutor is going to depend on that as one of the kind of foundational pieces of their case, I've got the answer to it already. The FBI's behavioral analysis unit, when that was developed, the people who developed it went out and interviewed serial killers so that they could get information that would help develop this particular agency within the FBI. So there is he could say that this guy wanted to write a book about this or wanted to become an expert to offer his services to police departments. So there are many ways.
Yeah, but Mike, did you hear what the person in that video said? The doctor, he said it would be like studying, if you had to overcome a lock, and it would be like studying a locksmith. I thought that was a great analogy.
Yeah.
That was definitely a great analogy. It was powerful to me. I mean, you hear that before, the jury might really think that's a powerful statement.
Precisely.
Guys, let me just take a quick break and introduce who we are. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like police or criminal justice podcast from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. Please, if you're not subscribed, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. If you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel memberships that's growing and growing and growing with 5 different levels. And the show, as a matter of fact, is also growing pretty well. And I think that has a lot to do with Phil and his the way he looks like Joe Pesci. People just buy into that and they love it. Anyway, thank you so much.
Parmesan, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for you contributing. Bob Robbins, thanks for the $9.99 super chat. Thank you for sharing. Oh, excuse me. Thank you for saying there is evil, because there is evil in this world, period. Whether someone is sick or not, evil is evil. Bob, I 100% agree with you. Vicky Loris, hi from a Canadian in Switzerland. I love your show. Thank you so much for the $10 super chat. And thank you guys for the love. We really appreciate it. We may come across as tough, cynical New Yorkers, but we still appreciate the love.
Absolutely. I think all 3 of us have looked evil in the eye. I know I have. I know Bill has, and I know you have, Mike.
Absolutely.
There's something about it. When you're talking to a person that committed a murder, let's say in a bar fight or something like that, that may not be such an evil person. But when you look at a serial killer, and I've arrested serial killers, and when they talk so matter-of-factly about taking someone's life, and you see the deadness in their eyes, that's the evil that I'm talking about. I know I've sat with the devil. I know all 3 of us have. And it's a little indescribable. I can't really put my finger on it, how to describe it, but just talking about it, I could get the chills, so to speak. But you know it when you've met evil. Mike, I know in your book you've talked about Eric Knight, I believe it is, or you're using a parallel of him. That was evil. That was evil. That was just an evil person that had no regard for human life at all. And we've met it many times. So with that said, I think we're getting a profile now of this particular individual, this Kohberger. And what that last reporter was talking about with regard to the bar that he frequented in Pennsylvania, the brewery owner said that he was creepy, and they actually put in the computer, staff put in the computer, hey, this guy makes creepy comments. Keep an eye on him. He'll have 2 or 3 beers and then just gets a little too comfortable, where he would actually bother the bartenders in the place. So I think we're getting a little bit of a profile about his antisocial behavior. They talked about how there's a 2-page article in the New York Post today about how he was very chubby when he was a kid, and he was bullied, and then he went into a metamorphosis where he lost a ton of weight, and but he always exhibited to be very, very tired and worn out, didn't sleep well, things like that. But however, after the murders were committed, they said his whole demeanor changed. So we're getting a pretty good profile of his background and what he seemed to be like in the days leading up to his arrest. So I think that's going to play into some of the prosecution. I think they may bring out things like that, specifically that they actually went so far as to put in the computer at that brewery that he was a creep.
Correct. I think that ultimately we're going to find out. I believe that this was a situation where rejection by one or more of these young ladies of this guy.
Bill and I have said that right from the beginning, Mike.
Yep. Somewhere along the line was the motivation for him doing this. Now, and as far as the other two are concerned, I think that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think that is what it is. But based on what you've just said, Phil, and what I've been reading about this guy, he's one of these people who has been laughed at, criticized, shunned during the course of his life, and now finally he's got himself in shape somewhat. And I think he felt that, I'm okay now. I'm going to go try and hit on these women. And I would bet you dollars to donuts that one or more of them rejected those advances out in Idaho. That's what I think is what's going to be the motivation. And Bill, you mentioned before that motivation is not part of what needs to be proven by a prosecutor. And that is absolutely correct. And I tell you, again, I can't tell you how many cases, and most of them have been murder cases. One of the first things, unless I did have a motive, one of the first things I would do when I stood up to pick a jury was to say, I do not have to prove motive. I do not have to tell you why he did it. I have to prove that he did it, but not why he did it. And I'd say that as much as I could during the course of jury selection, so that it would start to, get into the brain of the jurors, so that they wouldn't be looking for it. And that is one of the things that they're going to have to do if they can't prove a motive. In this case, they're going to have to hit it very, very hard. That there was no that they can't prove motive and don't have to. And what can I just say one other thing about motive? Sure. And that is, a lot of people have read into the fact that this guy was going across the country with his father to go home, as they call it, flight. Now, what I know from the cases that I've done is that flight is an indication of guilt. But to prove that this guy was running from Idaho to Pennsylvania is something which I wouldn't even waste my time on as a prosecutor, because he was going home for the Christmas holidays. And it was a preset trip that had been set. His father flew out there to drive with him back home for the holidays.
And he hung around for like 4 weeks, Mike. Before
absolutely. Absolutely. So I don't put too much stock in anybody, trying to make that argument that this was flight.
Mike, what they're trying to do, I think a lot of folks, is that, look, I didn't feel what right after this happened that a serial killer did this. I feel that this guy's a serial killer. I think he's killed before. I absolutely do. But having said that, I think people want to fit this square peg into the round hole. So did he kill animals when he was a kid? Because, of course, that's one of the traits of a serial killer. Right. Is he an organized or a disorganized offender? Someone said he's like this. How is he disorganized? He owns a car. He's studying for his PhD. He had a job. That was the traits of an organized offender, not a disorganized offender.
Very organized.
So all of those things people want to make, again, this square peg fit in this round hole. But guess what? We can never, and this is another canonism, we can never speak in absolutes, because there's always differences in things, and you can't fit that square peg in the round hole all the time.
Without a doubt. I agree with you 100%. And, and people who tried cases, and cases that, the number of cases I tried, I never walked into a courtroom and said, I just have to, just kind of throw my papers down on the table and the jury's going to find this guy guilty. Never. That never happened, because one of the strongest cases I've ever had. That was Eric Knight, by the way, Phil, was undermined by the fact that I lost the witness at the 11th hour. And while I had other parts of the case, the jury at the end of the day said to me, if you had one more witness, Mr. Vecchione, we would have convicted this guy. We think he did it. So you're correct, Bill. There are no absolutes, and you can't ever count your chickens before they hatch. That is absolutely the case.
Mike, they had a case, the prosecutor was Peter Casolero in the Manhattan DA's office, and there was this young dancer named Catherine Woods who was murdered by her boyfriend. And they found a bloody fingerprint behind the bed, which to me was slam dunk. He's done. It wasn't a slam dunk. The jury was like, yeah, we like that. But what really got us was the shoes he was wearing. And I was like, oh, my God.
Yeah, I know.
He bought those shoes with his mother's credit card. And there was and I was just like, wow, a bloody fingerprint in the crime scene wasn't the smoking gun piece of evidence.
You would think that's a slam dunk.
You never know, right? You never know what the slam dunk is.
But Bill, that's the only example of the absolute, that you never know what a jury's going to do at the end of the day, even though the case may be as strong as you've ever seen. So that's why that's why I started with you when I said this is not a slam dunk, because there is so much involved in this case that the slightest thing could be turned into the biggest thing once you're in a courtroom. And the jury is not like us. They're not people who've been involved in this kind of work forever. They're people who are going to want to be shown that this guy has done this, because they're going to listen to the judge. That becomes they're the person that they admire, that they respect more than anybody in the courtroom. And he's going to say that this person is not guilty until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And jurors are going to take that very seriously. So
they should. That's
absolutely. If I was sitting at the other table, I would want that to be them to take it very seriously. But I think that that's why I say that this Idaho DA has a lot of work ahead of him, whoever is going to try this case, simply because of the volume of work that was put into it by law enforcement.
Mike, two questions with that while I'm thinking of it. A, the prosecutor in Idaho, does he have the experience to try a case of this magnitude, of this complexity? And B, will he get help? C, I lied to you. It's a three-part question. Will they change? Will they request and get a change of venue?
I don't believe they'll get a change of venue, because I don't believe that that there is enough to make the argument that it's impossible for him to get a fair trial. I just don't see that. I think that the fact that Idaho is as spread out in terms of who the citizens are that going to be sit on this trial will give the judge pause as to saying, well, this is not a small town thing. This is not, the kind of I shouldn't say not a small town. I should say it's not where there's a concentration of citizens and everybody knows everything about the case. Nobody knows anything about this case, quite frankly, except what they've read in the newspaper. So I don't think a change of venue is going to happen. That's just my personal opinion. The other thing was, who's the prosecutor? I have no idea, Bill, who and what the quality of prosecution work is in Idaho. But if they did feel that they needed to get someone, they would have to deputize them, obviously, to become an assistant district attorney for the purpose of trying this case. And maybe they'll go that route. There may be some super prosecutor in either Idaho or Washington or Montana, or someone who they'll bring in to help try the case, if they don't have anybody who rises to the level of having the competence to try this kind of complicated murder case. It would not surprise me.
The prosecutor can have a hired gun too.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Yeah.
Mike, how about if they do, now that they have his DNA on file, how about if they tie him to another murder in a different state? Then the feds could take the case over, correct?
Could very well do it. Could be. Yes, could be. Depending upon, feds don't have a murder count. I mean, there's no murder charge in federal law, but they'd have to find something else. Crossing state lines to X, whatever the X may be. But that's a possibility.
Okay.
You know, I wish that we knew definitively everything about who is going to now handle this case from this point on, but we won't. But you know what, Bill, in the days that come and the weeks that come and the months that come, we're going to find out a lot about who the prosecutor was. The danger of what you've raised, Bill, of someone not having the experience was out in front of us during the summer when this guy, Kyle Rittenhouse, was charged with the situation in Wisconsin. The prosecutor in that case couldn't try a jaywalking case in New York City. That's how incompetent that guy was. So that could very well be the situation there. And maybe they learned after seeing the performance that DA did, that an assistant district attorney did, and I guess it was Wisconsin. Maybe they'll say, listen, we don't have anybody who can handle this. We need to deputize someone. And, you know, guys, it could be a qualified defense attorney, trial attorney, who was a defense attorney and has done many, many murder cases where they hire that person as an assistant district attorney for the purpose of trying this case. That's the other possibility. So it could be a dilemma, but hopefully whatever the result is, they did make the right choice, you know, in terms of
absolutely trial. Snug with Pug, thank you for a $7.99 super chat. Very much appreciated. Kathy, do you think this guy will ever be humbled? Are you talking about the killer? I don't think so. I think that part of doing what he did is some kind of twisted ego mania involved.
Well, no doubt.
He's enjoying the limelight right now. He's enjoying it, in my opinion.
Yep.
I believe so too, and I think that's one of the reasons he waived extradition is because he wants to get the show on the road.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And if I was his defense attorney, I think we may have mentioned this before we got on the air, I would not have counseled him to waive extradition because I would have wanted to learn as much as I could about what the prosecution in Idaho had, and they would have had to present at least some of that in order to give the judge enough to say, yes, he should be extradited back to Idaho. So, but that's me. The defense attorney in Pennsylvania, he did his job. He represented him for the 5 days or something or whatever, and protected his rights at this point. And now everything shifts across the country to, to Idaho. So.
Mike, one of the big things that I see, and one of the reasons an inexperienced prosecutor would struggle with this is the amount of physical evidence, DNA evidence, blood evidence, fiber evidence, trace evidence, transfer evidence. It's really tough. And there hasn't been a murder in Moscow, Idaho in 7 years.
Yep.
So I don't think the prosecutor has the experience to try a case. And maybe it'll go the same way as the police. Bring in a prosecutor that will help him. Maybe not be the named prosecutor in the case, but helps to put this case together because it's, Mike, you tried hundreds of murder cases. It's a difficult thing to do.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because, in addition to having this pile of evidence, all of this forensic information that you just talked about, Bill, you have to also understand what it means in conjunction with the next piece of evidence. If I'm going to place all of my, not all, but if I'm going to emphasize one part of the forensic evidence, that may very well take something away from another part of the forensic evidence. So you have to understand where and what you need to do to put the evidence together in a way that's going to present a complete picture. I used to talk about it as the evidence, the witness statements, the police reports, all of it needed to, what I used to say to the jury, that they came together and created a tapestry of guilt. And that's what they have to do. They have to, look at this and take all of these pieces of evidence and everything that they have, put them together. And that picture has to say, this guy is the killer. And that is not an easy thing to do for a prosecutor who hasn't tried cases like this.
Absolutely. Canadian Cookie, thank you for the $5 super sticker. And Mike, something, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Phil, but the other thing is that even like, as you explained, the organization of it, is so tough to figure out, like what you were just talking about. I think about even the opening statement. What is the opening statement? Are you going to focus on the evidence, or are you going to focus on this guy and what, how he studied murder, how he studied this stuff, how he's psychologically suited to do what he's accused of doing? Or will you focus on the evidence in the opening statement?
Yep. Well, you know the old saying, right? If you don't have the facts, you concentrate on the law. If you don't have the law, you concentrate on the facts. That's kind of what this prosecutor is going to have to do out there. And the defense attorney, the defense attorney's got an issue too. Where do I pick and what do I shoot at, in terms of trying to blow holes in this case? And so the experience, Bill, you're correct, can't be overlooked, or the lack of experience can't be overlooked in a case like this. It just can't. And you said the last murder in Idaho, or in Moscow, Idaho, was 7 years ago.
Yes.
Well, you know well, you do know how advanced science and forensics have gone forward in terms of those 7 years, and things that happened 7 years ago maybe have now been discredited. And this is the way we look at stuff, So that's a big factor in this case. And who knows? Maybe this guy Kohberger knew, takes advantage of that. Maybe instead of killing somebody in Pennsylvania, where there's more likely to have some experienced prosecutor, if he's a serial killer, let's say, well, I'm going to do this in Moscow, Idaho, where nobody knows what the hell they're doing. And so they arrest me, but that doesn't mean that they can convict me. I don't know this guy. I don't know enough about him to be able to say that that's definitive. But if this guy is the kind of person that they're trying to portray him to be, maybe he did give it that much thought. So
absolutely,
Mike, I just want to back up a little bit. You were talking about the different evidence, let's say the DNA evidence that's going to be put forward, and you were saying how one piece might make another piece of evidence not as strong. And what I'm getting at is, let's say there's a hair follicle that's found that's his hair in the location, but like you said earlier, he could be explained the way that he's been in the location before, let's say for a party, something like that. So would a prosecutor say, I'm not even going to introduce that because that's only going to be challenged, and the defense attorney's going to say, well, he was in the location, so that's how we can answer that out. Only use the strongest pieces of DNA evidence, let's say a blood droplet that's commingled with blood or something under the fingernail. Is that what you were getting at there, Mike?
Yes, it is. It is. But the other thing, Phil, you have to worry about is if you do leave something out as a prosecutor, not leave it out because you made a mistake, but on purpose, you have to be careful about what you leave out, because that's another thing the defense attorney can jump on and say, oh, he didn't want you to hear about that. You know why? Because they can't explain, or I can explain why that guy's hair was in the house, something of that nature. So it really, I think, is going to boil down to taking the strongest pieces of evidence that you have and trying to, as I said before, weave that tapestry of guilt with all of the things that kind of point to him, and then prepare to fend off what is going to be the attack by the defense attorney for some or all of that evidence. It's going to take a long time for this case to be ready to go to trial. And let's hope that they don't have a law like we have in New York, where you have to get this guy to trial within a certain period of time. It's hopefully it's more extensive in terms of, or extended period of time as opposed to right away. So, I got news for you guys. If this case was here in New York, I don't know how a prosecutor could get all of the discovery to the defense in the period of time that they must. And you say, Phil, it's 15 days?
I believe so.
So who knows? The other thing no one's ever talking about, this guy has not even been indicted yet. He's been arrested. They now have to present this case to the grand jury. And, maybe there's a chance that somehow the defense is going to put on a defense in the grand jury, and put witnesses on the stand, which they have the right to do, which they can, request to put witnesses on. So we shouldn't really jump ahead too much until this guy until there's an indictment in the case. For all we know, the evidence may not be as strong as, we believe it is. We keep talking about DNA, but there have been many DNA cases that have fallen by the wayside. So we shouldn't count our chickens at this point until
Absolutely. You know, Mike, some of the folks I don't think a lot of people that have been following this case really understand experience in law enforcement. And that goes beyond just the police. That goes to what we're just talking about, a prosecutor. But the reason this case was solved, if the Moscow police were left to their own devices, this case would not have been solved. Right. And I'm not criticizing. They needed help, and they got the help from the FBI and the Idaho State Police. This prosecutor, there's no doubt he's going to need help. He's not up to this. He is not. Right. I don't care what people say. Oh, he's smart. It doesn't matter how smart you are. You have no experience. You know, it's like, absolutely. You know, it's like giving a kid matches. You know, don't play with matches. No, dude, you can be as smart as hell, but you need to have, Mike, how many years were you a DA before you prosecuted a homicide?
I was probably about 6 years, 7 years before I got to do a homicide.
Hello, folks. See that? Right? Yeah. And you weren't good at it right away, right?
I can remember the first trial I ever did, and it was, I think back now, and it was an embarrassment. I'm embarrassed. I stood at the table of the prosecution table and read my summation on a pad. That's how inexperienced I was at the time. And no, I wasn't. And the first murder I ever did was a very, very difficult case. And I was just basically thrown to the wolves at that point back then. And Phil, you probably remember this. You know, back when I first started in the 70s, we had guys who had been in the office for a while, and they knew how to kind of move and dodge the tough cases and things of that nature. So the first case I tried, the guy who was my office mate had this case buried in the bottom of his drawer because he never wanted to try it. And the judge finally called my boss and said, "We got to try this case." So who do you think was stuck? The guy who was low man on the totem pole. I got this and had to try it. And I almost won it too. I almost won it. It was a case involving a murder, and the only evidence as to who did it was a guy was arguing with someone on the street in a 3 or 4 story building. And the evidence was at some point from the first floor window, a hand came out, pulled the trigger and shot the guy on the street. That was the case. That was the entire case. And at least I got a witness who was on the 3rd floor and said, "No, I saw the top of the head, and the guy had gray hair, and there was only one person in the apartment who had gray hair, was the defendant." But I kept the jury out for several days, and the only way I still believe this, the reason that there was an acquittal is because as the jury was out, it began to snow in Brooklyn, and I came back from lunch and I said to the judge, "Does the jury have a window in their room?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "And we're out of here. They're never going to stay around. It's snowing like crazy outside." And sure enough, about an hour later, an acquittal. Because it's much easier for people to say not guilty than it is to say guilty. Right. So you know, it's but I learned a lot from that case. I learned a great deal. And I got to tell you one other little thing about it. When they pick the jury and the 4-person who walks into the courtroom right very close to where the prosecution table is, that's where the first seat is. She was a young woman, and she used to smile at me every day, every single day. The defense attorney one day said to me, "Hey, you got something going with that 4-person?" I said, "What, you crazy? Are you out of your mind?" So, but he said she smiles at you every day, nods, says hello. At the end of the case, after the acquittal, jury stayed around. You know what they said to me? "Mike, you know who the leader of the pack was against you? Was the 4-person who kept smiling and nodding and giving me all kinds of, hellos." So. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things what I said before, you can't ever know definitively what a jury's going to do.
You didn't smile back, Mike. You should have smiled back.
Believe me, I did, Phil.
All right.
Smile as they stick the knife in your back, right?
Yeah.
You never can tell with a jury, you never can tell.
Yeah, that's why I said before, this has to be very, very solid in order to come forward with this case. Of course, we don't even know what this guy sounds like in terms of or how he presents himself in a courtroom, and whether or not the arrogance that we believe is there is going to come out and the jury's going to see it. We don't know that. That may very well really hurt him in terms of of trying to get an acquittal in this case. We just don't know. There are people who, or he may be the sweetest, perfect gentleman kind of person, and he walks into the courtroom every day and smiles and nods, and he's got his family sitting in the first row, and they're all dressed to the nines, and that has plays a major role in how juries vote at the end of the case. So,
absolutely.
There's a lot to find out.
Let me just play a little bit of this with Stephanopoulos here.
Murders. The criminology graduate student accused of stabbing 4 students to death is due in a Pennsylvania courtroom today for an extradition hearing. We're going to speak with the father of one of the victims after this report from Kana Whitworth in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Good morning, Kana.
George, good morning. So within hours, Bryan Kohberger will be brought from that correctional facility here to the courthouse. His lawyer telling me that since he's been there, he's been in a suicide smock at all times, including rec time. He also says the facility has been very accommodating to Bryan's vegan diet. As for today, he says his client isn't nervous and that his one request was that he get a chance to speak with his parents, something he said the court cannot accommodate.
This morning, Idaho quadruple murder suspect Bryan Kohberger just hours from his extradition hearing. His lawyer, Jason Labar, telling ABC News he remains calm and polite despite knowing the death penalty is on the table. He says Kohberger understands the seriousness of the charges and replied to him, quote, "This will be a long process." Now new details emerging about how law enforcement tracked Kohberger down. Sources telling ABC News they used public genealogy databases like those used to catch the Golden State Killer.
You have DNA from a crime, but you don't have a suspect. He's not in a database. So you use public databases of genealogy looking for relatives. Eventually, you get down to the point where you can match the DNA potentially to your suspect.
Recent students of his at Washington State University speaking out, one saying his appearance changed around the time the murders took place.
He looked a little bit more disheveled. He had like some stubble coming on. His hair was a little, messed up or whatever. I remember seeing him and thinking like, oh man, finals must be really getting to him.
28-year-old Kohberger remained a teacher's assistant, working towards his criminology PhD until the end of the semester before driving 2,500 miles to Pennsylvania with his father. His lawyer now telling ABC News that on that journey, he was pulled over twice for traffic violations in Indiana while driving that white Hyundai Elantra authorities have been looking for. Bryan arrested in an early morning SWAT team raid at his parents' home in a gated community over 2 weeks later. Labar telling ABC News, Bryan's father said they were told over a loudspeaker that the house was surrounded and their door was broken during the arrest. People in his hometown shocked.
How do you remember him at those parties?
Withdrawn, kept to himself.
Kohberger's lawyer says his client maintains his innocence and is eager to be exonerated in Idaho.
Now, Bryan's parents and 2 sisters plan on attending today. I'm also told that authorities here have been asked to be prepared for Bryan to go back to Idaho sometime tonight or tomorrow morning. Once he's there and appears in court, that official arrest affidavit will be unsealed, and we will learn a lot more about the prosecution case against him. George.
Interesting that his friend had a teardrop under his eye. That's usually indicative that that's a body, right?
Yeah.
From the street anyway, he's got a teardrop tattoo. Unbelievable. So that was interesting. The one part of very interesting is that I no doubt the FBI was following him on that jaunt. They probably called local law enforcement, said, pull him over, see what you see how he's acting. I'm sure they weren't collecting DNA off him when they pulled the car over.
No, I don't think so either. Unless
they
it
had
was
plenty
by
of time
accident.
to do that,
Yeah, there was a story in the New York Post today saying that the car stops were unrelated to the investigation. They did try to get a hold of the Indiana State Police to get a comment from them. They didn't confirm or deny. They didn't give a comment, but it appears that they were just routine car stops, but we don't really know.
Yeah, I don't think that cross-country trip is going to amount to much evidence in terms of the prosecution. Is
one of the things that I would want to get is I would want to get the body-worn video camera, the footage from the body-worn camera to see if perhaps maybe there was some markings on his face, cuts on his hands, things like that. I would definitely want to get that.
I was about to mention that to you guys. We don't know this because we haven't seen this kid, but how do you know? How do we know that he doesn't have, cuts on his hand? We don't know if that knife slipped and he cut it, because usually with a knife with that kind of stabbing, there are cuts on the hands because the knife slips in the hand, and unless there was a guard that prevented it from happening. But we don't know that, and that would be something which, as a defense attorney, I would really play up the fact that for 4 weeks, first of all, he was in Idaho and didn't go anywhere, and people who saw him didn't notice anything untoward about him in terms of injuries, which I would.
There was a report that he was wearing gloves frequently within the period of time, but again, it was cold, so who knows?
If you look at his nose, unless that's his normal nose, it looks like it's broken. It's bent out, it's totally bent out of shape.
Absolutely.
Right.
So they may want to try to, I don't know if a broken nose shows up in an x-ray, because nose is cartilage, but I'm sure
it could have been broken during the attack, and that's the blood DNA that was found at the location.
Yeah, it could very well. That's it. But the key to it, not the key, but the thing that is overarching in this entire this show and all of the reports is the word could. It could have been this. It could have been that. It could have been this, or this could have happened. We don't know, and hopefully, for the sake of the prosecutor and the families of those kids, that those people out in Idaho have removed as many of the coulds or woulds that they possibly could.
Absolutely.
So,
RC, thank you for the $10 super chat, and RC says, "Thank you, Mike. You're the most informed and interesting I have heard. Please come back." Wow, look at that, Mike. My guests re-invite guests. my listeners re-invite people.
A re-inviting guests. That's pretty cool.
Well, these guys are very, very, to whoever RC is, they're very kind, and I'd be happy to come back anytime they ask. So,
Mike, this is really we've covered cases, for the past year and a half. This is probably the most interesting case that we've covered so far. If this case was in New York City, it would be just as difficult as it is in Moscow, Idaho. It doesn't make it any more difficult. It makes it just difficult no matter where it is. Just the fact is that you would have more experienced investigators.
Yeah, and perhaps witnesses, in terms of the street and people in and about New York City, depending upon where it happened. But
Right.
You're right, Bill. It would be a difficult case even here. There's no question about it. The thing, again, can't forget is that we don't know how, we don't know this kid. We don't know him other than what people have talked about, and they've kind of like one of his students. Oh, he came back and he was disheveled, and maybe he was studying for exams. Maybe he just decided to had too much to drink the night before. You can't put any stock in what those kind of people say, but the news is the news. They want that stuff because it brings eyeballs to the screen, So.
Oh, Mike, even what we started believing it too, is the press pushed this narrative a lot, it's taking too long, and in reality, it didn't take too long.
No, it took just the right amount of time. And you remember, Bill, when I was here last with you about this, we all said that the science is going to be the thing that kind of leads them to an arrest. And that's exactly what happened here. It was the science, the extent of, or the extensive nature of the physical evidence in that house had to kind of bear fruit somewhere along the line. And it did.
Absolutely.
So I think the facts of the case, that fact that there were 2 other kids in the house, they were not disturbed, they didn't even wake up, 4 people were killed. The emotion was quite high in this case, and I believe that had something to do with the frustration of the public. Why didn't they, how could somebody have floated into this house, killed 4 people undetected, they leave and nobody saw anything? It's impossible. That's what I think the frustration was about. But then we looked at the configuration of the home, and we understood from previous tenants that if you were in the first floor of that house, the people on the second and third floor could have been having a party and you wouldn't have heard much noise at all. So it was
Exactly.
all explained. But Bill, you made the point. This really wasn't a long drawn out case. Things went according to schedule. You know, DNA analysis takes time to come back, all the other things that we talked about. So again, were the police doing their job? Absolutely. They had the FBI, the state police, and the local police working together. It just came together when it did. And I understand, you know, the public's frustration and even the families. You know, one of the fathers was out there talking to the news more than he probably should have. But again, he lost his daughter, frustrated, couldn't sleep at night, and I get it. But to me, it sounds like things went just according to the way they should have.
Absolutely. Look, the cops, the agents, the scientists, everybody had to have earphones on and keep all of that noise out in order for them to do their job properly. And at the end of the day, they did it. They did it properly, you know, and, you know, you can't listen, you can't try a case or you can't investigate a case, as you guys know, based on what the press is saying or writing. You can't do it. If you do, then we might as well just, you know, hang it up.
Well, Mike, it even exacerbates it more by the content creators on YouTube and the internet. The internet is, I mean, they come up with outrageous shit, you know.
There was conspiracy theories flying on this case like you couldn't believe. All kinds of crazy. There was some YouTuber, I think she's a tarot card reader, was saying that there was a college professor at the school that was out of town at the time. She was 100% responsible for the murder, and the professor actually brought a lawsuit against her. So again, things were running wild, conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And again, like you said, Mike, when I was an investigator on a case that was high profile, you had to just learn to drown out the noise of the case.
Absolutely.
Focus on the investigation, focus on the leads, focus on the evidence, and you have to just go wherever it takes you. And listen, that doesn't mean you discount, you know, other leads that come in. You have to answer those as well. But you have to stay focused on where this case is going evidence-wise. And that was really the way that this case should have been dealt with, and I'm sure it was.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm going to give you guys last words. Let me just shout out to some people. Selena, thank you for the 449 super sticker. Great panel. Great to have Mike back. Hey, pretty soon you guys are going to elect Mike the head of the show here. What's going on? There's too much love toward my guests. Data Dodger, thanks for the $2 super chat. Convict on burglary equals felony murder in Idaho. Yeah, well, this is way more than a felony murder for sure. Yeah. But it's also that. But this is way more than a felony murder. This is actually, and that's another time we can discuss it at another time. This is definitely a death penalty case. Mike, I'm going to let you go first. Last words.
Well, I hope that whoever gets this case in Idaho is up to the task. That's what I really want to make sure that, or hopefully they'll make sure that they get someone who knows how to do this kind of a case, and that all of the work of the detectives and agents and scientists doesn't go for naught because of some inexperienced person handling it. So if you're listening in Idaho, get somebody who knows what they're doing.
Thanks, Mike. Phil, final words.
Mike, I want to thank you for coming on today. Mike was a team player when I was in Brooklyn South in Coney Island Precinct working on homicides. No homicide is solved by one person or detective. It's always a team effort. We always had the district attorney's office behind us, helping, getting us subpoenas, whatever it may be. And then as we go forward, you make an arrest. Prosecution is very, very important. One other thing, the 400 tips that came in post-arrest on this particular individual, I would hope and pray that someone saw him with that weapon. If it's not recovered, someone may have information on it. That's going to be real important. If we can tie a similar type weapon to that perpetrator, I think that's going to be very important for the prosecution. God bless those kids. May they rest in peace, and prayers for the families. They're not going to get closure. They're just going to get some justice, hopefully, moving forward.
Absolutely. Folks, I know I'll say it, you know, because there are people out there that like us to say it. This guy's innocent until proven guilty. I know that they say that on every police show on television. I'll say it, although we're from the prosecution end. We're from to make the person or convict the person that did this heinous crime. Folks, thank you so much for supporting Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. Thank you much for listening. Thanks for Mike Vecchione, a fantastic author and former prosecutor for the Brooklyn DA's office, and my co-host today, Phil. Everyone have a great day and God bless.
You too, guys. Take care.
One episode just ain't enough.